What is actually happening in those moments? Your brain is trying to do too much, too fast, with too little structure. You're reading 3 to 4 dense abstract sentences written in LSAT, which is kind of like English, but way worse. And you're trying to simultaneously understand the literal meaning, analyze the logic, spot assumptions, remember every detail, predict the question type, and guess what kind of trap they set all at the same time, while a tiny voice in your head whispers, "Hurry up, you're falling behind, everybody else probably finished the section already." So of course your brain shuts down. That is normal. This is not a personal failing or flaw. It's just a consequence of bad strategy. So you've got to simplify the task in front of you to fix the issue. You shift from thinking you need to understand everything to, I just need the core point, what they're trying to say. That's it. That is your one job. And this is the same shift we guide students through all the time when we work with them in our coaching programs. Because most of the time, what looks like a logic problem is really just a clarity problem. And once you train yourself to focus on just that one thing, the core claim, the fog starts to lift fast. So let's break down exactly why this works. Most logical reasoning arguments are 80% filler and 20% function. And the LSAT, of course, will never admit this, but they bury the main point under layers of intellectual noise to make it feel harder than it is. You're gonna get examples, hypotheticals, background info, and weird names of cities or chemicals or diseases. Occasionally a study with suspiciously round numbers. It's not there to help you, it's there to distract you. It's like hiding the key under a pile of dirty laundry, dishes, and old LSAT prep books and then saying, go find it, but make sure you understand every sock. Your goal is not to fold the laundry. Your goal is to find the key. So don't waste precious mental energy getting everything. Instead, search for the main claim. Tune out the fluff, and zoom in on the argument's spine. You are not a sponge, you are a detective. You're not here to absorb everything, you're here to sniff out the point. And yes, some arguments will still feel messy, and that's okay. Sometimes you read an argument and think, I know there's an argument here somewhere, but it's buried under so much technical jargon, I feel like I need a PhD to decode it. You don't. Just ask, what do they want me to believe? And what's the one sentence this whole stimulus is orbiting around? It might not be at the end, it might not be there in bold, but it's there. And once you spot it, even roughly, the rest of the question starts to click. So next time you freeze, don't blame yourself, don't reread the whole thing 5 times hoping it magically makes sense, and don't try to brute force the logic your way through the fog. Just pause and ask, wait, what's the point? That one question is your anchor. Use it every time. Now, there are a lot of frameworks out there for logical reasoning. Some folks want you to diagram every sentence. Others want you to memorize formal logic rules. Some will even suggest color coding stimulus components like you're annotating Shakespeare. But you don't need all that. You need one question. One simple question that cuts through the clutter like a hot knife through butter. What's the point? That's it. You don't even need to know question types yet. You don't need to label the premises, and you don't need to diagram conditionals like you're on a whiteboard at NASA headquarters. Just ask, what is this person trying to convince me of? That question alone filters out 80% of the confusion. Let's take a quick example. Suppose you had the following, quote, several residents of Springdale reported nausea after eating at a local food truck. However, health inspections of the truck revealed no violations. Therefore, the nausea was likely caused by something else. Pause and ask yourself, what's the point? Answer, they think the food truck didn't cause the nausea, not what's the flaw or what's the assumption or what would strengthen this. Of course, you'll get there, but first, you need to identify the core argument, because if you skip this step, here's what happens. You latch on to a random detail, or you start overanalyzing the wrong part of the stimulus. And of course, worst of all, you fall for the trap answer that addresses something irrelevant but sounds smart. And then you go, I was so close. Yeah, you were close to the wrong idea. When we work with students, let's break it down. Step 1, say it in plain English. Most students make the mistake of treating the LSAT argument like some sacred legal document. They reread it carefully. They memorize every clause. They think, if I say this wrong in my head, I'm gonna miss the whole point. Nope, that is not how your brain works under pressure. Instead, translate the stimulus into the same language you'd use if you were texting a friend. If the stimulus says, quote, recent data indicates that public transportation ridership has declined in urban areas. Meanwhile, bicycle usage has surged. This suggests that urban commuters are switching to bikes as a primary mode of transportation. You don't need to quote it back to yourself like you're briefing a case. Just say, people are biking more, so maybe that's why fewer people are on the bus. Boom, that's the argument. No need for formal logic. No need to diagram anything. You're not writing a law review article here. You're just figuring out what someone's trying to argue. And by the way, quick side note, when we work with students who struggle with confidence, this is often the turning point. Once they realize they don't have to decode the exact sentence structure, they finally relax enough to think clearly. So don't parrot the stimulus. Rephrase it like you're explaining it to someone who's only half listening because they're watching a video of a cute dog. Step 2, make a rough prediction. And this is where most students panic. They ask, how can I predict the answer if I don't even know what the question type is yet? Thing is, you don't need to know the correct answer. You just need to make a rough guess about what kind of thing would help or hurt the argument. Think of it like narrowing the search. If you know you're looking for a missing puzzle piece, you're not going to suddenly pick up a toaster. So here's an example of another argument. Quote, new safety regulations reduced factory injuries, but productivity dropped. So the regulations must be hurting efficiency. What are they assuming? Roughly, that the safety rules caused the drop in productivity. So your rough prediction could be something like, they're assuming nothing else changed. You're not writing a perfect answer here. You're just narrowing the field. Even a sloppy prediction is enough to spot bad answers that go in the wrong direction. And it stops you from falling into the read all 5 and hope one feels right trap. Because, spoiler, they all feel right when you're guessing. Now, the third step is to eliminate aggressively, and this is where the rubber meets the road. The LSAT isn't really about choosing the best answer, it's about not falling for the wrong ones. Once you've rephrased the argument and made a rough prediction, it's time to go into elimination mode. You want to look for choices that are too strong, out of scope, or sound good, but do nothing. Examples of choices that are too strong might use words like always, must, or only, and the stimulus wasn't that extreme. Choices out of scope will introduce new ideas that weren't even hinted at. And choices that sound good but do nothing are your fluff answers. They use vague, academic-sounding language, but don't actually do anything for the argument. So if you're stuck between two choices, ask yourself which one directly interacts with the core point of the argument. Not which one is longer, not which one sounds smart, and not the one that uses words you don't fully understand but feel guilty eliminating. Ask which one does something useful, and that's going to be your answer. Let's talk about one of the LSAT's favorite tricks, the weird situation trap. Here's how it works. They give you a strange or surprising observation, something that doesn't quite add up, and then they immediately jump to an overly confident conclusion to explain it. For example, people in region A get less sleep than people in region B, but report more energy during the day. Then the conclusion goes, therefore, sleep must not affect energy levels. Okay, hold up. On the surface, that might feel logical, but look closer. The conclusion here is assuming that sleep is the only thing that could explain energy levels, and it assumes that self-reported energy levels are even a reliable measure in the first place. What if region A has stronger coffee? What if they're younger? What if they just think they're more energetic, but they aren't? This is the classic curious fact pattern. You're presented with an unexpected result like less sleep, more energy, and then you're pushed toward a conclusion that pretends to explain it completely. But here's the key insight. Anytime you see the LSAT using a surprising statistic, a contradiction, or an unexpected result to support a conclusion, your red flag should go up. Why? Because weird results equal sloppy logic almost every single time. So how do you beat this? You don't need to disprove the conclusion. You just need to undermine the logic they use to get there. And here are 3 go-to questions that'll help you do just that. The first is asking if something else could explain this. This is where you generate alternate explanations, like other factors. Maybe region A has better diets, or more sunshine, or a cultural tendency to exaggerate. The more alternatives you can think of, the weaker the conclusion becomes. The second question to ask yourself is if cause and effect could be reversed. What if it's not that less sleep leads to more energy, but instead, people who feel more energetic tend to sleep less? This kind of reversal is a common LSAT trap. They show you a pattern, then they jump to which direction the cause is moving without having the evidence to back it up. The third question to ask yourself is if both things might be caused by something else entirely. This is what's called a third variable. Maybe a different factor is affecting both sleep and energy, like stress levels or even how the data was collected. Now let's go one layer deeper. The language they use matters. When you see phrases like must be the reason, therefore the only explanation, or this proves that, that's your cue. The LSAT is locking in one possible explanation, and they are ignoring every other possibility. And that's where you strike. Even if the conclusion sounds reasonable, even if it feels right, remember this. The LSAT isn't testing whether the conclusion is true or not. It's testing whether the argument for it makes sense. And that is a big difference. So here's how I recommend that you practice this. Grab a whole bunch of strengthen and weaken questions that use weird data or unexpected results. Every time you see one, ask those 3 questions. Is there another explanation? Could cause and effect be reversed? Or is there a third hidden factor? If you can do that automatically, you will start to spot this trap in seconds. And once you see it, it loses all its power. You go from confused and second guessing to being confident and in control, and that is how top scorers think. That is your internal filter. And then, when you hit the answer choices, look for violations. Any of the following red flags should mean immediate elimination. If there is a new concept or a new term that didn't appear in the stimulus. If there is language that is stronger than the stimulus supports, like saying all instead of some. Or if there is real-world logic that sounds right, but isn't provable from the passage. Now, most students go into must-be-true questions thinking, which answer sounds good? But top scorers go in thinking, which answer is provable without adding anything new? That shift changes everything. When you start training yourself to think like a lawyer, not a trivia contestant, these questions stop feeling tricky. You stop falling for traps, and you start spotting airtight logic in 30 seconds flat. Now let's talk about parallel reasoning questions. This is the LSAT at its most annoying. Not because it's tricky, but because it's time-consuming if you approach it the wrong way. Most people see parallel reasoning questions and immediately groan. 5 long answer choices, all of them wordy, all looking incredibly similar, but just different enough to make you second-guess everything. But the good news is that parallel reasoning questions are beatable. Once you know what to ignore and what to zoom in on, they become way faster and more predictable. But first, let's break down what a parallel question is actually testing. It's not testing whether you understand the topic, it's testing whether you can match the structure of the reasoning. That's it. If the original argument uses a conditional statement and flips it in the conclusion, the right answer will do the same kind of flip, maybe with a totally different topic. If the original argument jumps from a small sample to a broad generalization, the right answer will jump in the exact same way. So here is your golden rule. Ignore the topic and match the skeleton. Let me show you how this plays out. Suppose the argument in the stimulus says, all turtles are reptiles, Franklin is a reptile, therefore Franklin is a turtle. That might sound okay if you're skimming, but replay that. This is a conditional error. Specifically, it's reversing the conditional. Just because all turtles are reptiles doesn't mean that all reptiles are turtles. Franklin being a reptile doesn't mean anything or prove anything about whether he's a turtle. So in the choices, what are we looking for? We want another argument that also reverses a conditional. Doesn't matter what it's about topic-wise. It could be cars, birds, yoga classes. We don't care about the topic. We're looking for the same flawed move. So maybe the correct answer will say, all architects are designers. Sam is a designer, therefore Sam is an architect. Boom. Same logical structure, different topic. That is your answer. Now, the question, of course, is how do you do this fast? First, you want to ID the conclusion. Ask yourself, what is the author trying to prove? Because that's what the choices are going to try to match. Then you want to ID the evidence, namely what supports the conclusion. Is it a conditional, a comparison, a generalization? Then you map the logic. Now here's what I recommend. Say the structure out loud, but strip out the nouns. So if the argument is all A's are B's, C is B, therefore C is A, you say they reversed a conditional, or they confused a necessary condition for a sufficient condition. That is your structure and that is what you're matching. Then you go to the choices and eliminate aggressively. Don't read every single word, look for the conclusion and look for the structure. Ask yourself, does this follow the same type of reasoning? Or is it just similar in topic, but different in logic? If it's the latter, you want to knock it out fast. Now here's a pro tip that separates top scorers. Don't diagram everything. That is what most students do, and it slows them down. Instead, ask yourself, can I describe the argument in plain English? Like, this argument assumes that because two things are related, one caused the other. Or, this argument confuses some with all. Or, this argument reverses the logic in the evidence. If you can say that clearly, you don't need symbols. You just need to scan the choices for something that follows the same flawed thinking. Now let's talk about why smart people get destroyed by logical reasoning. It's not because they're bad at logic. It's because the LSAT is designed to trick people who are good at school. You've spent your whole academic life being rewarded for reading carefully, overthinking, and hedging your bets. Now, you're doing the LSAT where that exact instinct gets used against you. The first big trap you want to watch out for is what I call the fancy word answer. You read choice C, and it includes phrases like causal generalization across populations, or inferential misalignment, or methodological inconsistency in empirical validation. And your brain goes, well, I don't totally get it, but it sounds like something my future law professor might say. So you pick it. Don't. Here's a rule of thumb. If the choice sounds like a legal brief, but doesn't make sense to you after two reads, it's probably not the right answer. The LSAT is not trying to reward obscure vocabulary. It's trying to test logical clarity. And logic is not about sounding smart. It's about connecting ideas clearly. So if an answer choice leaves you thinking, huh? Toss it. You're not in school anymore. You're in LSAT land. And here, clarity beats clever. The second big trap is the answer that is 95% right, but the other 5% is going to kill you. And this is the one that almost gets you. The wording is perfect, except for one little extreme word hiding in there like a landmine. They'll use words like must, always, only if. And one strong word like that takes an otherwise solid answer and makes it too rigid to be right. Remember, the LSAT loves subtlety. And most correct answers will use softer language like some, often, may, and could. This leaves room for interpretation, because real arguments aren't typically black and white. Now, if the stimulus itself makes an extreme claim, like this always causes that, then an extreme answer might match, but if the stimulus is moderate, the correct answer will be too. Pro tip, by the way, when we work with students, we have them do extreme language drills. We black out the answer choices and then have them highlight just the intense words. It is wild how many wrong answers jump out at you once you stop trying to understand and start spotting the patterns. Now, the third big trap is the fix for the wrong problem answer. And this one is sneaky. What you've got to ask yourself is, does this answer actually attack or support the argument's reasoning, or is it just offering background noise? If it's background noise, it's out. Now, the fourth big trap is the feel good but useless answer. This is feel good fluff. These answers are like fortune cookies. They're vague, optimistic, and totally irrelevant. For example, it might say, this underscores the importance of future research, or this highlights a key concern in public discourse, or this suggests that the topic warrants deeper examination. Cool. And these answers feel smart because they use big words, but they don't interact with the argument at all. This is like someone asking you to fix a leaky sink and you reply, plumbing is important. Technically true, but not very helpful. So any answer that sounds good, but doesn't actually do anything to the logic, you want to eliminate it. Now here's a bonus trap for you, the out of scope nonsense. Classic LSAT move. The stimulus is about one thing, and the choice is secretly about something else entirely. For example, quote, local officials banned sugary drinks in schools to reduce obesity. The wrong answer says, the beverage industry's lobbying efforts have increased in recent years. Okay, and you'll see these a lot. They throw in other cities, other time periods, different populations, and random policy implications. So always ask, is this choice dealing with the same conversation the stimulus started? If not, it's a hard no. Now let's say you're in the middle of logical reasoning if you have standard timing, meaning 35 minutes per section, that you aim to complete the first 10 questions in roughly 10 to 12 minutes to allow you to build up a time bank that you can then apply to the tougher questions later in the section. For those who don't know, logical reasoning questions are presented in a general order of difficulty, meaning they go from easy to hard, they get tougher as the section goes on. So if you have on average 1 minute and 25 questions per section, it does not make sense to allocate the same minute 25 for an easy question as you would for a more difficult question. Blaze through the easy ones, build up a time bank that you can then apply to the tougher questions later. And by the way, feel free to flag and skip questions to come back to later. Know which questions you don't like so that you don't invest time in them before throwing up your hands in despair and saying, I don't know what to do. Instead, just flag it, skip it, come back to it at the end after you already have the confidence of knowing that you've already locked up all the easy points. Personally, I will flag 3 or 4 questions in a single logical reasoning section of roughly 25 questions because I just don't want to deal with them in the moment. That means I'm taking roughly 17-18% of the questions in the section and saying, I don't like this, I don't want to touch it, I'll deal with you later. So for me, I don't like dealing with lengthy parallel questions that show up late in the section or technical science questions that I'm not as comfortable with given the topic. Of course, given enough time, I can crack that question, but why risk getting bogged down or stuck on it given that every question is worth the same? So know off the bat what you don't want to deal with, flag it, skip it, come back to it later with a fresh look, a second perspective. You'll break out of that tunnel vision and be able to get that question right in the end with the confidence of knowing you've already locked up everything else. Now, let's say you're in the middle of a logical reasoning section. You hit question 14. The stimulus is dense. You reread it. Still doesn't make sense. You glance at the clock. Your pulse spikes. Suddenly, the panic starts whispering, you're running out of time. This section's going terribly. You're not ready for this test. And boom, your brain freezes. First, remember, this happens to everyone. It does not mean you're dumb. It doesn't mean you're not ready. It just means you're human. Even our students who eventually score 175 and above hit this kind of wall during their practice. So let's talk about what to actually do in those moments. Because if you don't have a plan, your instinct will be to reread the stimulus 5 more times while spiraling. Please don't do that. The following is your 3-part game plan for recovering when your brain blanks out in logical reasoning. First, skim for the core. When you're panicking, your working memory is fried. You can't retain 5 sentences in a row, so stop trying. Instead, go into triage mode. Read the stimulus once, calmly, like you're just trying to get the vibe. Then ask, what's the author trying to say? Don't worry about every term. Don't worry about the exact logic. Just look for the main point. Even a rough understanding is better than none. You're not looking for 100% clarity. You're looking for enough to make an educated move. Think of it like this. You're not trying to untangle every knot in a shoelace. You're just trying to find where the knot started. Second, flag and move. And this is the part most test takers resist. They think, if I just stare at this a little longer, I'm going to figure it out. That's a trap. Just because you're stuck on question 14 doesn't mean question 15 will be worse. In fact, it might be a gimme. So here's the rule. If you don't have a basic idea of what the argument's saying within 30 to 45 seconds, flag it and move on. Come back later. Give your brain a break. Let your subconscious chew on it while you bank easy points on the next few. This one move alone can save your section. Third, use the gut check on answer choices. Let's say you're truly lost. You flagged a question, came back to it, and it's still foggy. You're tempted to skip it entirely or pick randomly. Instead, do a fast scan of the choices for red flags. Look out for extreme words like always, never, must, and only if. Look out for new concepts. If they're introducing something that wasn't in the stimulus, it's probably off topic. And look out for fluff. If it sounds fancy but doesn't do anything to the argument, throw it out. You don't need to love your answer. You just need to eliminate the worst ones and take your best remaining shot. Even a 50-50 guess after knocking out 3 choices is way better than a full blank or a wild guess among 5. And this sounds obvious, but test anxiety is real. If you feel your chest tightening, your hands sweating, or your thoughts racing, pause. But you're not learning why you're getting things wrong. And that means you're just rehearsing the same mistakes over and over. Think of it like shooting free throws with your eyes closed and then checking the scoreboard after every 10 shots. It's effort, it's repetition, but it's not training. Now here's the routine we give students when we work with them one-on-one, and it works whether you're scoring in the 150s or aiming for 175. First step, do a small set under real timing. Just 5 to 10 questions, that's it. I know it's tempting to binge entire exams, but that leads to rushed answers, foggy memory, and vague review. When you work in smaller sets, you can actually remember what you were thinking on each question, and that's where the learning happens. Time yourself, but don't obsess over shaving off seconds. This is about accuracy under pressure, not turning yourself into a logic speedrunner. Step 2, for each question, write down 5 things. And yes, this is going to feel annoying at first, and that's good. Annoying means you're actually slowing down and paying attention. After each question, whether you got it right or wrong, write down first, what was the argument about, in your own words. Secondly, what did I predict, even if it was vague. Third, why did I choose the answer I picked? And be honest here. It sounded good is a valid starting point. Fourth, you ask yourself, why is the right answer better? And talk about what you missed. Finally, what trap, if any, did I fall for? Was it too strong, out of scope, fluffy language, fancy words? Whatever the case, this is how you start building awareness. And awareness is the difference between plateauing at 158 and breaking into the 170s. Finally, step 3, track your patterns over time. You don't need a fancy spreadsheet. A notebook or a Google Doc is totally fine. What you want to look for is recurring themes. For example, are you consistently missing strengthening questions? Do you keep falling for answers with extreme language? Do you get stuck when the stimulus is about science or economics? Whatever the case, once you see the patterns, you can fix them. We've had students realize they were getting every single resolve the paradox question wrong, not because they were bad at logic, but because they kept looking for cause and effect instead of the missing link. It's like realizing you're driving with the emergency brake on. Once you realize it, you can release it. And this is counterintuitive, but it's important. If you take the time now to slow down and review deeply, you're going to get faster later because you'll stop repeating the same mistakes. Trying to get faster before you're accurate is like trying to run before you've learned how to walk without falling over. Fix the thinking and the speed will follow. And by the way, this kind of deep review takes time. It's not sexy, it's not grind mode. You're not going to rack up Instagram-worthy stats like, I did 4,000 questions this month. But here's the trade-off. Would you rather feel productive or actually get better? Because the students who put in the time to do this kind of review, they're the ones who go from missing 12 questions per section to missing only 2 or 3 consistently.